Good afternoon.
On behalf of the Black Student Psychological Association, I would like to welcome all of you here today. It's very gratifying to see so many of you in our midst. My name is Pamela George, and I'm the co-chair of the association along with Willie McNeil. Will you understand?
Sure. Willie.
The Black Student Psychological Association is committed to enhancing the knowledge of Black students on this campus who are concerned with issues that involve our personal growth and professional development. But we hope that what we learn about ourselves and our profession also enriches that which unites us as a people and enlightens our collective genius. To that end, we know that you will enjoy our speaker today. Dr. Louis King is our scheduled speaker, but we regret to announce that he will not be with us today due to a family emergency. But fortunately, we are very, very grateful that Dr. Lawford Gooddard is here with us today. Dr. Lawford Gooddard is a sociologist demographer who received his doctoral degree from Stanford University with a minor in education and is currently employed as the executive senior associate at the Institute for the Advanced Study of Black Family, Black Culture in Oakland, California. He is also the Senior Research Associate of the Fanon Research Center in Los Angeles. Dr. Gooddard possesses a broad, multidisciplinary social science background, having studied extensively in the areas of sociology, demography, education, history, political economy, and cultural pluralism. As a sociologist interested in the issues of economic development, Dr. Gooddard is particularly concerned with such issues as urbanization, mortality patterns, fertility values, and population redistribution as they relate to social change and their impact on third world countries and communities. His general interest in research on third world communities is supplemented by interest in teaching, counseling, and planning. His most recent research interest lies in the area of Black adolescents, the ages, issues related to the delivery and utilization of healthcare in the third world communities, and the impact of migration on Black family dynamics. Let's welcome Dr. Lawford Gooddard.
It's always difficult to be a standby because people have certain expectations and they expect to hear a particular person when they come to the setting. It's difficult to be a stand-in. And so I'm going to try my best today to be an adequate stand-in for Dr. King. What I want to talk to you about today is to look at the future and to discuss with you the Black family in the 21st century. Too often we are caught up with activities, our life schedule, etc. And we are always tied up with the immediate present. And we never look beyond where we are at the present to see where we will be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now. So the topic for today will be the Black family in the 21st century, destroyed or reclaimed. Just let it turn for this morning. The study tone for this morning's discussion, I'd like to start with an African proverb that says, the day on which one sets out is not the day to begin preparation. As we approach the 21st century, it is clear that planet Earth as we know it is undergoing a certain amount of transformation that has some implications for the way in which the Black family and the Black community would be able to exist in the 21st century. And within this process of social change, the American society has changed rapidly and drastically in a manner that if we are not cognizant of these changes and make plans for what our family life would be in the 21st century, then the Black population as we know it and the Black family as a distinct cultural entity would not be in existence in the 21st century. We are at the critical point in our history in American society, at a point where if we do not examine where we came from and where we are going, then we will find that in the 21st century, the Black community as a distinct group would not be in existence, although there would be Black people in American society. So the sense of community that I'm talking about is being challenged by the kinds of changes that are taking place in American society. Okay? In terms then of discussing the future black family, I think that what I want to start off with is to talk about certain processes that are impacting upon the black community. And the most significant one is the emergence of the single parent family unit as a distinct form of social organization. And that when we look at the black community, we have seen that in the period 1960 to 1980, the proportion of families in the black community headed by women has increased from 34% to 45% in 1982. The consequence of this is that whereas in 1960, only 75% of all black children were living in two-parent households, by 1983, we have the reverse, whereas 54% of all black children are living in single-parent households. The emergence of the single-parent unit as a distinct form of family organization is not without certain other, without the effect of certain other processes that are affecting the black population. The most dramatic of which is the decline in sex ratio and disappearance of the black male from American society. Throughout, if we look at the 1980, the black population was 26 million, accounting for about 12% of the nation's population. And this population is projected to increase to 33 million in the year 2000, of which we expect 35% of the males and 31% of the females to be under 20 years of age in the year 2000. When we look at the changes in the sex ratio that are taking place, we see that the sex ratio has declined from a high, and it is projected to be as low as 91 in the year 2000. That is 91 males to every 100 females. This change in the sex ratio is a consequence of certain demographic processes as well as certain social policies that are taking place in society. The most significant of which is the differential rate of incarceration of the black male population. Whereas in 1980, blacks accounted for only 12% of the total population, we accounted for 46% of the prison population. Of the prison population, 89% of the blacks who are in prison are males. And of those males, 51% are in the age group 20 to 29. The implication of this is that this age group, 20 to 29, which is the future who would be 40 to 49 in the year 2000, this is the age group that is not being exposed to the kinds of changes that are taking place and to the kinds of educational opportunities that are existing in American society at the present time. The second consequence, or the second factor that is important in looking at the emergence of the single-parent household is the effects of war on the black male population. The most significant of which may be the Vietnamese War in the period 1956 to 1964. And during the Vietnamese War, more soldiers were killed in that war than in any other war in the history of American society. And of the soldiers that were killed, the dominant and the majority of those were black males. We are seeing the effects of that when we look at the age structure of the black population. And we look at the age group 30 to 39. These are the guys, this is the age group which bore the brunt of the Vietnamese War. So that when we see shortages in those particular age groups, this represents those who were actually killed in the war. But then there's a significant casualty caused by the effects of that war in terms of drug abuse, and some of the psychological consequences of that war that we have not even begun to address. What are the psychological consequences of the Vietnamese War upon the black male population? A third factor that we are seeing as significant in the changing sex ratio of the black population is the incidence or the effects of violence upon the black male. In that what we are seeing is that the black homicide rate of 65 per 1,000 population in 1980, every 1,000 black males, 65 died as a result of homicide in black community in 1980. And this rate was 4 times the rate for black females, 6 times the rate for white males, and 20 times the rate for white males. The consequence of this is that we see the black community characterized by a kind of violence in which crime or homicide is perpetrated against black males in particular. When we look at the age group 20 to 24, we are seeing that homicide is the leading cause of death among black males. And when we look at black male teenagers, we see that accidents, homicide, and suicide are the 3 leading causes of death among black male teenagers. The implication of this is, if present trend continues, is that we as a people need to launch a massive campaign to save the black male. Because the black male, given the present trend, is an endangered species in American society. And much as the Greenpeace Society, etc., have a Save the Whale campaign, we as the people need a Save the Black Male campaign if we are to continue as a distinct cultural group in 21st century. Given the kinds of changes then, or given the demographic composition of the black population, and given the changing composition of the black family, what we are seeing is that the black community is characterized by a process of early childbearing. At the same time, we are seeing a high incidence of infant mortality in the black community. By age 25, most black women have already completed their childbearing process and have moved on to other aspects in their social life. Within the wider society, the opposite takes place, that childbearing takes place at a later age in the wider population. Among the black population, we have the process of early childbearing. The implication of this is that the black population will continue to be a younger population well into the 21st century if the present trend is continuing. And this has certain implications in terms of the delivery of social services, particularly education and the question of child care. Because given the pattern of the economic pattern or the pattern of the economic structure, we are seeing that black females enter the labor force at a higher rate, and that they have more younger children who are in need of child care facilities. So once we understand the demographic processes, then we can understand some of the social implications that emerge out of those patterns that characterize the black population. The second process that is impacting upon the black community, and that has implications for the structure of the black family in the 21st century, is the changing economy or the restructuring of the American economy. The American economy is undergoing a process of transformation where it is attempting to restructure itself from an industrial base to an information-producing type of economy. And within that information-producing type of economy, there is a demand for a different type of skilled labor force than it existed previously. The type of labor force that the society would require in the late 20th, early 21st century would be people like image makers, computer analysis, computer programmers, business executives, etc. These are the very occupations for which blacks are not being educated, given the structure of the educational system in the society. When we look at the black employment patterns, what we are seeing is that blacks still are concentrated in the lower echelons of white-collar occupations. And what we are seeing also is that the black gains in white-collar occupations have been really an increase in female employment rather than male gains in the employment market. For example, the proportion of The proportion of black workers in clerical and sales occupation for females increased from 9% to 31% in 1980, from 9% in 1960 to 31% in 1980. So 31% of all black women who are employed in 1980 were in clerical and sales occupations. Given the structured differential rate patterns, we know that these are the less or the lower paying occupations in society at the present time. Again, given the trends, when we project into the future, the economic viability of female-headed household units to provide those necessary goods and services for the children would be severely limited given the differential rate of pay that exists in American society. So the other significant feature that emerges out of analysis of the economic structure of American society is the withdrawal of the black male from the labor force. During the period 1970 to 1982, the male labor force participation ratio, that is the proportion of males who are participating in the labor force, who are either employed, unemployed, or looking for work, that fell from 83% in 1960 to 70% in 1982. At the same time, when we look at the female labor force participation ratio, we see the opposite trend, with an increase from 48% in 1960 to 54% in 1982. The implication of this, again, going back to the endangered status of the black male, is that if these trends continue, then by the year 2000, the proportion of the labor force participation ratio would decline to almost 50% for black males. That is, almost half of the black males would have dropped out of participating in the labor force by the year 2000 if the present trends continue. The participation, in addition to this, we are seeing that the restructuring of the American society has taken place or is taking place at the same time where there's a rapid increase in black unemployment ratio. Between the period 1970 to 1982, in a 12-year period, unemployment rate increased by 140% among the black population. So that in 1982, the unemployment rate for the black population was 20%. That is 1 in every 5 black persons in American society in 1980 was unemployed. When we look at the teenage unemployment ratio, we see that in 1980 it was 48% for black male teenagers and 46% for black female teenagers. Again, if we go back and remember the structure of the black population, where we have a large proportion of our population concentrated in the young groups, the implication of unemployment at the present time is that this unemployment will carry over into the adult years of the life of the black adult at a very time when the society is changing the requirements for entry into occupation. At a time where we are becoming more, quote, educated, the requirements for employment become more prior job experience over educational qualification. So that as we have made gains in one area, the criteria for determining entry into the goods of the society, those criteria are changing suddenly. So that given the present teenage unemployment rate, it is projected that if that continues, that adult blacks, both males and females, will have a more difficult time gaining employment in the 1980s, 1990s, and in the year 2000. The consequence we are already seeing then in terms of the relative decline in the median income of the black population. While, and we have to be clear now that how statistics are used to create certain impressions, while the total median income for the black population has increased over the years. Okay? It has increased over the years. But when we look at it in comparative terms, in comparison to the white family median income, we see actually there's been a retrogression in income position of the black population, in that In 1970, the ratio of the black to white median income was 0.661. That is, for every dollar that the white family had to spend, the black family had 61 cents. This has declined over the years to 0.56 in the year 1980. The interesting aspect of the comparison of the black to white median income is that when we look at it on a regional level, we see that the society is becoming closer and closer in terms of the relative income disparity between black and white. In that the rate that characterized the black population as a whole, it is very similar to what existed in the South in the late 1960s and early 1970s. And that where traditionally the Western region and the Northeastern industrial region had always been seen as a land of opportunity that had a higher relative income position for blacks, that disparity is shrinking, so that overall conditions in the West, in the North Central, and the South are becoming more similar. And it is becoming more similar, not in terms of reducing the disparity between black and white, but increasing the disparity. The consequence of this then, given the withdrawal of the black males from the labor force, the increasing participation of females in the workplace, is that the next generation of blacks in American society are likely to be less economically viable than their parents, marking the first period in the history of the black population that we are seeing an economic retrogression in the black population. Traditionally, it has always been the case that the children did better than the parents over the 20th century. But the generation of the 1970s and 1980s, this generation is likely to be the first group whose parents are doing better than the children. And the consequence of that is the changing effects of the educational system. When we look at educational data, we are seeing, if we take the example of California, using California as an example, we are seeing a decline in the proportion of blacks who are qualified or who are making it into the college system. In the graduating high school class of the year 1982 to 1983, of that graduating high school class, only 4% of the black students who graduated, high school students who graduated in the year 1982 to 1983, only 4% of that group qualified for admittance to the University of California college system. And 22% of that graduating class qualified for the state college system. If we look at just at that mere statistic, and given, again, the change in the economic structure, the requirements for different type of labor force, we are seeing that the school system is not preparing black students for participation in a meaningful way in the economic system of the 21st century. So that as we look at these processes that are taking place in the society, we recognize that the black community and the black family in particular is facing a severe challenge upon its ability to exist as an entity or as a form of social institution that has some impact upon the future growth and development of the children. In examining the contemporary economic conditions, the outcome of that is that black children who represent the future of the black race in the year 2000, the children who are 0 to 4 in 1980, in 20 years' time, those would be the leaders of our society. They would be in age group 20 to 24, who are the most significant in terms of family formation, in terms of education, in terms of employment, etc. But when we look at the condition of children in the year 1980, we see that in 1980, the black child is more likely to live with one parent given the change in change in family composition. Where there are two parents in the family, that black child is more likely to have both parents in the labor force, hence they experience the quote latchkey syndrome where they come home to an empty house. At the same time, given the participation of those black adults in the labor force, the need for childcare becomes a critical issue at a very time where there are no provisions within the tax structure for recompensation for those kinds of services. The other thing is that the black child is more likely to live in households below the official poverty level, again going back to the economic structure and the family composition. And that the black child is more likely to suffer from more health problems and yet receive fewer health services. And where those health services are obtained, they are generally in an emergency care system rather than an ongoing process of health care. The consequence of this then is that the black child in the year 1980 is suffering as a consequence of certain societal processes that impact upon the family system and make that black child less resilient or less likely to participate to its fullest extent in the future system. Given these changes, then it is clear that unless certain changes take place in our society, that we as a people and the black family as a social institution will probably disappear by the year 2000. We have a task to undertake as a people in that generally we have always adopted a reactive stance. And by the time we are aware of certain social and policy procedures, we enter into the decision-making process at the time of the implementation of a particular program that affects and impacts upon us. But we have to begin to take charge and to adopt a proactive stance and to begin to plan and project for what we would like our family life to be in the 21st century. It is clear that as a people, we have gone through certain changes in our sense of being, in our sense of who we are as a people. And as we adopt more and more of the individualistic kinds of orientation that characterize the wider society, we see more and more of the negative consequences of that individualism expressed in our community structure and in our family life. We see, for example, the rapid increase in suicide, particularly among the young. We see the increase in drug abuse and alcoholism in the black community. We begin to see a breakdown in those intergenerational support systems that have enabled our parents and grandparents to survive in a more hostile environment that exists at the present time. And this breakdown in intergenerational support system manifests itself in terms of the attack on elderly in our community. And as all these processes unfold, it is clear that we have to restructure and reshape and recreate our design for living and to reclaim our cultural heritage in such a manner that we would protect our own vested interests as a people. And the protection of those vested interests require that we determine for ourselves our sense of humanity and our sense of being as an entity. In conclusion, I'd like to end with one African proverb that says, memory reaches further than the eye. And if we recall our memory, if we recall the wise sayings of our parents and grandparents, then we can begin to adopt and to recreate our design for living and reclaim and protect the black family as a social entity.
Dr. Guthrie, is that correct? Gooddard?
Yes.
Yes, sir. In your analysis or in your estimation and the information that you've given us, would you unequivocally state to us as being black students that this program that is being initiated against the black family, in particular the black male, is something that's systematically being sat down and thought out to do?
means that one does not even need to have a conspiracy theory. One just has to look at the data and analyze the data and then draw the conclusion.
So, but
it is clear when we look at what's happening in the society that the changes that are taking place in the black family are not accidental. For example, in 1954, when the infamous Moynihan report was published, only 27% of black families at that time were single parent units. And yet Moynihan, in his analysis, used that 27% to characterize all black families. The consequence of that, in a long-term thing, in a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, was the emergence of the single parent family as a sort of normal form of family organization within the black community.
thank you.
That's one. Yeah.
You were talking about giving reasons for why black men being scared. How do you account for educated black men who are married outside their race, who are families of other women other than black?
That's a good question. Good question. That's a good question.
That's a separate lecture in and of itself. But one of the things that data is showing is that there's an increase in the proportion of interracial marriage where the male part, which involves a male. And part of that has probably, and you all are better than this since I'm not a psychologist, but part of that has to do with some of the kinds of images that are projected in American society as the standards of beauty, and that there's a certain image that the society projects as, quote, the standard of beauty. And so to the extent that one attempts to be successful and to buy into the become part of that wider system, then one adopts or accepts all of the other trends that go along with that. And consequently, there is that increase in interracial marriages.
Okay, you've made us more aware of the things that are happening within the black community. What are some of the individual things that we can do to help this type of thing from becoming a reality?
Okay. In terms of solutions, you as the leaders of the next generation in early 1990s and early 21st century, you all will be in positions of leadership, both in terms of heading and directing programs, in terms of being the teachers, the educators of the next generation, etc. And so once you are aware of where you came from and you see the vision of what the future is like, then you can begin to shape that future in terms of your own vision. You can begin working within the school systems in terms of helping teenagers to go through that educational process, encourage them to remain within the school system and not drop out. You can begin working along the old philosophy of each one teach one, which existed over many generations ago. And we can begin to reclaim some of those traditions that allowed us as a group. We can begin to create those group connections, those group strategies, that communal type of living that had existed at a particular time. It seems that as the world is becoming smaller and smaller in terms of the ability of different groups and entities to communicate at a faster rate, that the individual is becoming more and more isolated and withdrawn from the wider society. And that isolation then prevents or destroys those bonds that had existed, particularly in the black community. And so if we have to redress or divert some of these trends, then we should begin to actively recreate those bonds that existed within the black community.
Well, what I found, it's not like we don't have these institutions already in place to protect black people. I mean, like our black churches have been viable since, we got here. But what I'm seeing in my personal experience is that, we see a lot of young kids having kids, and they're not even addressing those issues. It's like, say, you see around you all these young girls having babies, and so that means somebody's got to talk about some sex education, and nobody's even doing that.
But sex education is not the the end point of it. That's only the beginning point. Because at the same time, we also have to instill in our black male teenagers a sense of responsibility.
Right.
And that within that process, we have to create rituals that would allow those black males to assert their sense of manhood beyond just the fathering of a child. That's just one process. Given the type of society we live in, it is not the old, or it is not the proper means of asserting one's manhood by fathering a child. We have to create those rituals that would allow our black male teenagers to assert their manhood in a more productive and more responsible manner. That has existed in the past.
Well, I think it's very much answered. I enjoyed your figures, and I think it's good that you and I, on one hand, all agree that the black family is in trouble, and that the black male is the heart of that. And yet we have this belief now that it's not the black man but the white woman that needs the special treatment. I think this is what tripped us up more than anything else. One on one hand was the failure of black scholars to see what they should have known, that the black male is the backbone, is the heart of this plan in a patriarchal society to keep down the black race, because you cannot have a battle race if you kill the person who's supposed to be representing that essence. And I don't know, I guess what I'm trying to say, but I decided not to ask the question, is, what I'm trying to ask is whether you see any possibility of this new need being answered, solved by the black scholars. It seems like they haven't been doing it for the last 20 years.
Yeah, well, I think that we're beginning to see, not so much on the level of black scholars, but in terms of the practical side, in terms of the service delivery aspect, that those people who are engaged in delivering services are beginning to look closely at the condition of the black male, particularly male teenagers, and to begin talking about creating alternate programs that will encourage responsibility, manhood, etc. And that once we begin at that level, that ultimately our scholarship will follow the lead of the service providers. So what I'm saying is that there is a kind of trade-off between the scholars and the service providers. And at this particular time, the service providers seem to be taking the lead. But I think that eventually the scholarship will catch up with the service providers.
Yeah, you talked about the high rate of suicide among black. And I just wonder, how do you feel about black teenagers are organized and armed themselves to protect themselves in their own community? In other words, like that. Because a lot of these so-called homicide situations where white people just come in and kill off black advantage, or whenever they feel like, maybe they can't find anything else to kill, like they have a gang and just go shoot black advantage, just shoot them down. I mean, isn't there a way that we can educate perhaps our community to arm themselves and provide some kind of defense for this kind of thing?
Well, I don't think that arming yourself will be the solution, because if you can buy 10 guns, the wider society can buy machine guns. So I don't think that arming ourselves would solve the problem. In fact, if anything, it would lead to the more rapid extermination of the black males in particular. I think that what we need to do is regain control of our community in terms of gaining the decision-making, education, the decision-making in the economic sphere, in the educational sphere, in the community relations, and in the religious sphere within our community. And then once we take control of our community along those lines, and we begin to create programs for our own vested interests, then those programs would expand outwards, and we begin to see more and more blacks being in positions of authority and leadership.
One question still in your head. I was wondering, you were talking about the increase of homicide among black males. Is this among black on black crime, or is this part of society?
It is a combination of both black and black crime, and the increase in the legal execution of prisoners for homicide. The data is showing that for where the victim is a white person, that the chances of being executed are higher, or being sentenced are higher, and then one sentence, chances of execution are even higher. So there is that aspect of the process.
Exactly. I just want to ask you one more. On this violence against black on black crimes, is that rejecting what society put on the black male, so he's taking it out instead of like on each other? That's like
Well, it's a little more than that, in that what I see it as a breakdown in terms of the sense of being, and a breakdown in terms of the sense of, in terms of the value system, in that when we look at the black community traditionally, the black community has been a place where one was relatively safe, and that one could walk through the black community at ease without fear of life or living. But over the past 30, 40 years, that process has changed, and the black community is becoming increasingly characterized by the sense of fear. And part of that has to do, I think, with the emergence of this sense of individuality. That I am me, and what I do has no connection with what you do, right? And that I will get whatever I want by whatever means I want. And so I see that more as a sense of individualism permeating our community.
Yes, sir.
More single parental therapy. There's two nexus. There must be something that's happening between those two individuals. I don't think
I think that one of the things that possibly might explain that is the change again in the value system. In that traditionally one could argue that the black family had always existed for the growth and development of the children, and that those parents, male and female, always did whatever was necessary for the welfare of the children. But what we have seen, or what we can project to take place, is that more and more each person is trying to see what he can get out of the relationship for himself. So rather than doing it for you, I'm saying, what can you do for me? So it's more an individualistic rather than a cooperative value system that's creating our community. And so it becomes easier then, if those feelings are not satisfied, it becomes easier to move on and establish an alternate relationship.
You don't think sex roles are in our mind or something that they're changing sex roles that
Well, only the belief that change in sexual is detrimental to the male. The male belief that the change in sexual is detrimental to his sense of manhood. That belief, I think, is what is at the cause of some of it. Because traditionally, black women have always been working, they have always been in the labor force, they have always been performing. Even in those cases where the black male was unemployed, and he oftentimes performed those kinds of roles that the society had defined as female roles, without any question as to his masculinity. But once he begins to believe that washing dishes and taking care of the babies is a threat to his manhood, then he begins to see the black woman as a threat to his sense of manhood. And out of that, he begins to see some of those behaviors.
This is the white woman again.
One question. Sorry about that, man. Yeah, I heard you.
Okay, we have time for two more questions, and then I have some important announcements to make, and I would like everyone to stay and listen to them because it's important because it carries over from Dr. Goddard's conversation.
Dr. Goddard, one quick question. You raised the problem of black males being incarcerated and systematically being done away by the system that exists today. What recourse do black women have to solve this problem that exists in the black nucleus of black family household? I mean, what can these sisters do, and what recourses do they have with the things that you mentioned in terms of incarceration of black men, black on black crime brothers, killing brothers, and a variety of other reasons that there are a lack of black men that are here?
If I had that answer, you're familiar. But I think that part of the strategy that we need to adopt is to create some community dialogue, and then out of those community dialogues, that the members of those communities create standards of what is appropriate or inappropriate behavior. So that once the community establishes the criteria, then we begin to recreate that extended family network. And so it isn't a question of having an individual single-parent household, but having an extended family that is comprised of several single-parent households that combine to solve some of the problems around parenting, for example, around discipline of children, etc. So I think that it's something that I think that should emerge out of the practice of the particular community, and that the community should set the standard for what is appropriate at a particular time.
Thank you.
The role issue. I want to ask something about the role issue, which seems to get off on the black woman and the black man. Do you see a connection between the white woman coming into the labor force's role and the black man not coming into it, or the black man going out of it?
Yes. One of the things that's clear is that as the black male participation in labor force is increasing, his unemployment rate is increasing, etc., we're seeing a greater participation of white females in the labor force. And again, because of the past educational experience of white females, they are more likely to have a higher educational level and therefore gain some of those positions that are traditionally gone to black females. So there is a direct relationship between the two. Dr. Nobles?
Yeah. If you were a student today, what would you do to prepare yourself to meet the future for the black family?
What would I do to it?
If you were a student right now, like these young people are, what would you do? What would you be doing now to prepare yourself for the future?
Right now.
I think that to do that would require an understanding or extensive study in terms of the historical experience of the black population. In keeping myself in the values of what black population, or what the values of the black population would, understanding the real relationship between those values, the cultural system of the black population, and the sense of community that existed in the black community, and then having had that sort of foundation in the sort of culture or philosophy of the black community, then making certain choices in terms of certain career decisions that would impact upon the black community in the long run. So that I would steep myself in a sort of black cultural orientation at the same time as I would acquire those skills that would be necessary for participation in the future. And all of this would be towards returning or remaining in the black community in the 21st century. As it existed in the past, in terms of organization that was comprised of aunts, uncles, grandparents, cousins, etc., kinship network. That structure, actually, when we look at the black community in the past, we see that the black community operated as if it was a family system, and that even though there were some geographical boundaries, but there were some real limitations about what was appropriate and inappropriate within that community system. But now there are no standards within our community, and we need to recreate. So that's what I'm talking about, the recreation of those standards, those principles that allowed us as a group to have a common sense of identity.
Okay, let's thank Dr. Goddard. Dr. Goddard at the Institute for the Advanced Study of Black Family Life and Culture. And the address is 155 Filbert in Oakland. For those of you who have a pen ready, the phone number is 836-3245. Also, those of you who expressed concern just being here is important. Now, I know still you have questions, and those of you who are interested in addressing these questions, individually, that's important. But I think collectively, as a group, we can get more done. Black Student Psychological Association, as a group, comes together and we address issues like this. And this is just one aspect of where we can disseminate information to you, students, so that to prepare you for the future. And also our professional organization, which is the Bay Area Association of Black Psychologists, does exactly the same thing. They're meeting this Saturday at the dock of the bay, and it's at 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock. For those of you who need more information, there's an announcement in the Black Perspective. You should have that. And if you can't make that, fill out the subscription inside, mail that in so that they can keep contact with you. It's a free subscription. Also, the Black Student Psychological Association, we have a meeting Wednesday, December the 4th at 12 o'clock, site building in 401. So again, those of you who have more questions pertaining to this discussion or just the Black Student Psychological Association, please show up. We welcome your participation. Thank you very much again for coming out. And I'd like to thank the members of the Black Student Psychological Association who worked very diligently to help actualize this event.
Don't forget now to go vote.
Yeah, I thought that Dr. Gooddard's discussion of the future of the black family was interesting and provocative. I think he provided us with some insights that are very important for students particularly to begin to deal with. Namely looking at the fact that there is a trend and a pattern that's occurring in the black family and in the black community, and that we have a stake and a responsibility for turning that trend around. That the student's responsibility, as he mentioned, is to prepare themselves not only in the technical skills that make them marketable, but also to prepare themselves as cultural animals and to understand the vested interests of the black community and their responsibility for protecting that vested interest. That the trends that he explicated in a very detailed way will not change or go away if black people don't take responsibility for our own future.
I think the presentation by Dr. Gooddard was a very significant one for me myself. I think you need more presentations like that on this campus to make more students, mainly the black students, more aware of what's going on, because he put out some significant things, especially about the black male as being almost on the process of going extinct. And by bringing that to my attention now, that even makes me strive harder in my classes more to better myself so I can help better my community and my people as a whole. So I think those type of things, those type of lectures and presentations we need more of to make our people more aware of what's going on in this society so we can be around in the 21st century. And that, I think, is very significant to have.
I think what Dr. Gooddard had to say about the service workers, the people who are giving service, that the responsibility for changing the way things are in our community is going to lie with them. And I find that since I majored in black studies, it will put me ahead in being able to work in this way, because I do have plans on being a teacher. And I think that taking some courses in black studies can help to prepare students that are majoring in other subjects for this particular area of service that they will have to deal with when they come out of school, irregardless if it's social work, medical work, retail, marketing, business. Just the very idea of having a little bit more self-knowledge and ideas about the problems that's affecting the black community, we will be able to better serve the black community.
Well, as an older generation, parent and a grandparent, speech was very, very good, very well thought out and researched. But I don't feel very optimistic at the moment. But there is one thing that gave me a little hope, and I was very pleased to see so many young black males here and interested in this problem. And I do agree with Dr. Goddard that is where it's going to have to come from, that our men will have to take the lead. We overdue.
Dr. Goddard, as you were talking today, you began to speak on the different statistics that were relevant to the black family in terms of what was happening towards the decline in the different areas in the black family. And I'd like to go back as a college student to go back and speak on the educational system and the college system, and how do you think that is detrimental towards the black family. I also would like you to expound on how the black family functioning can be advanced through the college system, because we know that we have different
institutions of racism within the college system that each black student, whether male or female, has to try to conquer as they're going through. And as you go through it and you're trying to conquer these obstacles, plus go through the school system, it is very difficult to maintain your aspirations, to maintain your goals, you know, your different values and ideology. And I'd like you to expound on that for a few minutes.
I think that when we look at the educational system, we see that the culture of the school system is in opposition to the natural culture of the black population, in that the school system places emphasis on individualism, competition, whereas in the black family, the values that are exposed are traditionally a sense of cooperation, mutual aid,